The federal shutdown is inching closer to Hoosiers' pocketbooks. A visit from the border czar sparks applause and anger. And Indiana University's award-winning student newspaper is finding itself in the headlines. From the television studios at WFYI, it's Indiana Week in Review for the week ending October 17th, 2025.
Indiana Week in Review is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations.
A food aid program that helps millions of mothers and young children could run out of money as the federal government shutdown moves into its third week. The program in question is the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, better known as WIC. States like Indiana face a difficult choice: use their own funds to keep assistance flowing or simply let the program lapse. The latter option would affect some 157,000 Hoosiers who rely on the Food and Formula Assistance Program, according to our reporting partners at Capital Chronicle. Advocates warn that any interruption in the program would be devastating to mothers already struggling to make ends meet. The Indiana Department of Health declined to offer details, but said that, quote, funds have been identified to keep WIC operating as normal for the foreseeable future. Emily Weichert Bryant with Feeding Indiana's Hungry says Hoosier aid recipients should be okay as long as much needed nutrition can get from point A to point B.
The only time we will start to see significant disruption there is if there is a significant disruption in furloughed employees, which could at some point have a cascading impact that interrupts food deliveries and distributions.
Other health programs, including a telehealth program and an in-home care program used by people on Medicare, also could be in harm's way since the shutdown has prevented Congress from extending their funding. Are Hoosiers starting to feel the impact of this shutdown? It's the first question for our Indiana Week in Review panel. Democrat Ann DeLaney, Republican Chris Mitchem, Jill Sheridan, managing editor at WFYI, and Niki Kelly, editor-in-chief of Indiana Capital Chronicle. I'm Jon Schwantes, host of Indiana Lawmakers and interim host of Indiana Week in Review. And how worried should Hoosiers be about this impasse?
I think they should be worried. I mean, this is all up to Donald Trump. He could declare this an essential service, and he could fund these programs just as he does whatever ones he has as his favorites. This is seen as a Democratic program, though, and he has specifically targeted Democratic programs for the acts under this shutdown. The bigger problem, it seems to me, is that there's no trust left in the system. You know, if Democrats were negotiating with Republicans, there's no guarantee that whatever compromise they worked out would be carried through. Donald Trump can be relied on to change whatever thing he agrees to the next day, and so that it doesn't encourage trust on either side, and I don't really see an end to this.
The measure that would make this mandatory, that is something that Democrats have talked about this week, introduced the bill, which I'm guessing has a chance of zero. And for those listening on radio, I'm holding up, my fingers are making a zero. Chris Mitchem, where is the president on this? The White House patted itself on the back for saying we, through some very clever types of maneuvering, we got $300 million in unspent tariff revenue that we can put toward this. I mean, is it either it's a good program or it's bad? Can you pat yourself on the back for keeping something going if it's seemingly flawed in their mind in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, you can play the blame game in D.C. all you want. You know, I can just, within the last 24 hours, Democrats voted down a proposal to continue to fund the Pentagon just to make sure that military members get, you know, revenue and don't miss a paycheck. So it really does work both ways. It's the Democrats that are kind of holding out on particular things that are keeping the government shut down, if you want to play that game. But I think when it comes to an Indiana standard, we are really fortunate to be in Indiana, mainly because I feel like every couple times you ask me to be on the show, I get to talk about how good it is to have the reserves and the financial position that Indiana does. You know, we were able to weather a pandemic, then we were able to weather a $2 billion shortfall, and now that we have this another unforeseen circumstance that has nothing to do with the Indiana legislature, we are now in a position, the Department of Health already said, to be able to continue to supply a lot of these crucial elements. And you have other states around the country that are saying the exact opposite of, if the money runs out, we don't have any way to supplement it. So I think a lot of credit continues to have to go to the Indiana legislature, the budget writers, for being in a position to be able to weather a lot of these unforeseen circumstances.
The only reason we weathered the pandemic was because of federal funds. It wasn't because of the state or the state's ingenuity or the state's fiscal policy. And if we stopped cutting both income tax and corporate income tax, we would have the money to do the essential services. That's something Republicans aren't interested in.
So you're comfortable, again, that statement that we read, foreseeable future. You're comforted by that, though, in terms of Indiana Department of Health, even though it doesn't offer a lot of detail at this point.
Yeah, I think the pressure, I mean, what happened with the last government shutdown, right? The pressure from people who are even trying to catch flights and delay can be the one thing that really pushes legislators to come to an agreement. So I would hope that foreseeable future would encompass that time period. But, you know, if not, I think we do have the revenue available.
What I just heard from Chris there is that feeding poor children doesn't really have as much sway as people missing their flights.
Yeah.
Look, it took us days and days to get for the foreseeable future from the Indiana Department of Health. So I hope they have identified the funds. They would not share where they would come from or how long they might last, but I have to take them at their word and hope that we can continue that, because there are poor people in this state, and many of them children or infants, that do need some help.
And this program has been proven effective.
Absolutely, for decades.
You know, Chris mentioned other states, and we're better off in relative terms. We do look at other states that are seemingly having more difficulty. There was a WIC office that was closed this week for the foreseeable future, a phrase that will come in handy, I suppose, in Kansas. I think the state of Mississippi has either halted or scaled back its receipt of applications for people joining the program there. Are we headed for something similar to Kansas or Mississippi?
A commercial report this week that did say that Indiana is in a better position, found that we're in a much better position than many other states. We have less federal workers, less national parks as far as weathering, a shutdown like this. It's the programs like the telehealth program that was mentioned at the end of that package that can't be renewed, that, many Medicare patients really love, that those things, that ripple effect during the shutdown, that I think when Hoosiers will really start feeling it. I'm happy to report I traveled last week and we were in Fort Lauderdale, and there were so many TSA agents, but this was a week ago. And, where are we going to be in November? Where are we going to be with the WIC program? Where are we going to be with many programs?
Niki, you alluded to the notion of, again, in terms of impact, what gets the public's outrage, it gets their dander up. Is it air travel or is it children? Let me ask you about that, because the president this week has told ICE officers, for instance, and FBI officers, you're going to get paid. You're getting a super check. I mean, presumably there's no more authorization necessarily for that funding, I don't think, than there would be to pay this channel. So, I mean, it adds to that notion that what is his priority should be, I guess, all of our priority. And how does that play with Hoosiers?
I mean, I think until you're directly impacted, the shutdown is kind of mythical almost to you, right? And so for most Hoosiers, they're not directly impacted, and they're just not even really focusing on it.
All right, let's move on. U.S. border czar Tom Homan visited the State House this week for an event hosted by Indiana Attorney General Todd Rokita and Representative J.D. Prescott. Speakers focused on immigration legislation that failed to win passage in the General Assembly earlier this year. Now dubbed the Fairness Act, the proposal would require local law enforcement agencies to comply with federal detention requests and extend the amount of time detainees could be held before being turned over to U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. Homan said he appreciated the state's cooperation in housing detainees at the Miami Correctional Facility, and he lauded partnerships between ICE and local law enforcement agencies. He said he hoped Indiana lawmakers would back the so-called Fairness Act in the coming session.
This is going to make our communities that much safer. Every day, ICE agents are out there arresting public safety threats and national security threats.
Outside the event, dozens of protesters gathered with signs in hand. Sharon Cruz, a former prosecutor who pivoted to immigration law last year, said Homan and state officials should respect the law and appreciate the value brought by immigration.
I know that this state is built on immigration, and I do not accept that we can just be sold off to be deported with no due process, with no rights at all.
Speakers at the protest urged attendees to keep showing up and to keep advocating for immigrants. Indiana's next legislative session starts in January. Chris, will Tom Homan's visit lead to stricter policies regarding immigration here in the state?
I certainly do think it can influence it because, maybe unlike redistricting where you're seeing some federal government pressures, immigration policy is a winning issue for Republicans. You saw that in the last election. That's why Donald Trump made it one of the key stakes of his campaign.
Is it still, though? I agree with you. The polls suggested it was a potent issue before, but now you look at it with some of the raids and so forth. I wonder if it shifted, and in fact, you hear the president's tone changing, that the fight against crime, not exclusively immigration.
Yeah, I mean, the results of it, right, especially when you look at the southern border, I think it is working. His policies are working. You have record low crossings when it comes to, monthly numbers and things like that. So I do think his visit will definitely spur an increased likelihood of a bill coming. And I actually think the Indiana General Assembly has a pretty good track record when it comes to forming immigration policy that, believe it or not, last section got a couple of bipartisan support. Actually, there was a bill that basically clarified an existing Indiana law that already said that if you're a detention center or if you're a law enforcement officer, you have to cooperate with ICE. So this bill pretty much clarified what that cooperation looks like. And it went from, using reasonable suspicion to just pull somebody over to upping it to probable cause. They have to be detained with a misdemeanor or a felony, and then also shifting kind of the paperwork duty from the law enforcement officers to the detention centers, just to make sure that law enforcement officers continue to go and protect our communities and things like that. And that was like a whole process throughout the session. So it went from one area where nobody really liked it to an area where it did get a little bit of bipartisan support. So I do think
in the House. I mean, it did pass the House, but I don't.
Talking about a different bill.
Or a different bill. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, this bill that they alluded to at this rally or this event got, I believe, through the House, but didn't get a hearing
stalled in the Senate. So I do think maybe they were able to use that immigration bill that they passed last year as kind of the bellwether for this one coming up.
Where's this on the agenda of lawmakers? Do you think this session?
They send a guy who's been accused of taking $50,000 in a paper bag in an FBI sting, and they send him as a representative of the most corrupt administration in the history of this country to try to influence the Indiana General Assembly. It's interesting that during the course of those discussions, what they want is they want one language, one culture, and frankly, one face. Okay, they don't want blacks. They don't want they don't want Hispanics. They want somebody who, frankly, practices the same religion, speaks the same thing, and has the same values as Todd Rokita. I mean, that is dangerous. This country's strength has always been that it's a melting pot, that we take all these diverse cultures and we put them through a public education system so that the first generation born here speaks the language, understands the culture, and understands the values of this country. They want to stop that. And I frankly think that that's part of the Christian nationalist agenda, and it's frightening it ought to be frightening for anybody of any kind of diverse background or religion or color in this country.
And Niki, Ann questioned the wisdom of using Tom Homan as a poster child for this cause. And I did notice that he's still denying, even this week, even in conservative outlets, saying, I didn't do anything wrong. And in fact, the headlines about this event were competing with headlines about him saying for the umpteenth time, I guess, he didn't do anything. Is this a bad judgment about using him as the rah-rah cheerleader?
It was an interesting choice, and I do think it impacted the event a little. Originally, it was supposed to be public in the atrium, and anyone could attend, and reporters could be around. And then it was, at the last minute, moved inside the House chamber. Reporters weren't allowed in. Neither was the public. It was invite only. So, I mean, they definitely wanted to create some space for him. But he still got to give his talk, and I think what Chris was starting to say about the other bill is last year they could stop the bill that people had a lot of questions about because they said, oh, we already have this one over here. It does all this great stuff. Boom. But next year, I think it's going to be even more pressure on the one that cracks down on employers. It requires jails to honor detainer requests. And the big one is it gives a bunch of new power to the Attorney General.
Well, and speaking of the Attorney General, Todd Rokita was co-host of this event. The chief legal officer in the state of Indiana, is there a problem with the juxtaposition of hosting an event like that and having as your marquee speaker somebody who is still, there's some clouds surrounding his
Well, I don't think he would I don't think he was really thinking about that. You know, he wanted the name to come and talk on this issue, and listening to his talk, you know, he had some pretty staggering numbers that he threw out there. You know, 2 million people that had been removed from the country, most of them self-deported. The vast majority of those people, you know, he's saying are criminal, and that is where I question, because you know, talking to the protesters outside, they are, you know, their core message is that the people are not getting due process. So how will we know, you know, what these people's status are? Maybe we should consider, you know, making it easier, making the system that is broken easier for people to come here and become citizens.
Time now for viewer feedback. Each week, we pose an unscientific online poll question. This week's question: should the state pass more restrictive immigration legislation? A, yes, B, no. Last week's question: does Indianapolis need outside help to enforce public safety? 90% said no, 10% said yes. If I'm not mistaken, that's identical to the breakdown last week. Not that you people are consistent, but I will give you credit for that. If you would like to take part in the poll, go to WFYI.org/IWIR and look for the poll. Indiana University is ending all print editions of the Indiana Daily Student, a student-run publication launched in 1867. The announcement came on the same day the university fired its director of student media. WFIU's Ethan Sandweiss reports.
Media School Dean David Tolchinsky announced last night that campus leadership decided to end print editions starting this week, hours after he fired Director of Student Media Jim Rodenbush. After IU paid almost $1 million of debt for the IDS, it limited printing to 7 special themed editions per semester. Rodenbush refused to enforce the media school's directive that those special editions contain no news unrelated to the theme. He says leadership first gave him those directions in September.
I am in a position where I can tell my editors that this is the thing that's been said to me, but then it then falls under their whatever they want to do is whatever they want to do.
Tolchinsky confirmed to IDS staff Wednesday morning that the IDS will now be a digital-only publication.
Niki, what does this mean for journalism at Indiana University?
It's a rough time right now, and I mean, this is getting national attention by major people. I've heard a lot of people say, oh, and look, let's be clear, going digital is not a bad thing. A lot of college papers have been nothing but digital for more than a decade. But they do have these special editions. One was Homecoming, and you got to remember, Homecoming, you're going to have a bunch of alumni, right, on the thing. They want to be able to pick it up and look at it. And suddenly, you know, the administration says, well, we only want Homecoming news in there. So that's just, and while that might seem reasonable to some people, you have to look at what's next. What's the next thing they say? Well, we don't want you to write about that, and we don't want you to write about that. So the students had to take a stand, and I'm glad they did. And I think they're getting a lot of attention, and hopefully they'll figure out a way to have a little more control over the finances. I know Mark Cuban said he gave $250,000, but the administration's not letting them use it for certain things. And so the whole thing is honestly just a mess.
I mean, if the goal was to keep any sort of non-rah-rah football team is great news out of this edition, that was an abject failure, because not only are there more eyeballs than ever on this, but the IDS published the entire edition online as it would have appeared in print, with notion of censored across the top, and called it the edition. Here's what you would have read.
Right.
I'm guessing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of more people are paying attention to it now. How screwed up could IU have screwed that up any more than they
I think
did?
it was handled really poorly in the public.
Just from a PR standpoint, forget the First Amendment issues.
Right. And I think, you know, the bigger concern, as I understand, you know, this is part of a move at IU with their media school to, you know, make bring the student in and like make it more of an umbrella over the whole media school, changing the media school. But I think the thing that really stands out to me is that, you know, I'm hearing a lot of the students were not, you know, they were not asked at all about this. And same thing at Purdue, you know, and what message with the Exponent, you know, what message does that send to student journalists who, you know, are working in universities right now? I don't think it sends a good message.
Well, the university talks about this plan and they have committee members that weighed in on the future of journalism education. But it is sort of odd that you would have this termination, this brouhaha over the publication, and then announce within 24, 48 hours that we're ceasing. There does seem to be a little bit of retribution there.
There's no question about that. And you know, the administration of IU and the Board of Trustees ought to be ashamed of themselves, and they ought to have been ashamed of themselves for months about that way they've handled First Amendment issues. Frankly, you know, the IU student, the Daily Student, had always been held up. It's one of the best 3 or 4 newspapers, student-run newspapers in the country. And a lot of graduates in very prestigious journalism positions were students on the Indiana Daily Student.
You're looking at me when you say that, because I was a student who spent 3 years on staff there. Thank you for pointing that out.
My point is, it's a very important part of the culture of the School of Journalism at IU. And frankly, they should take a page out of The Exponent. The Exponent in '69 went to a not-for-profit foundation, the Purdue Exponent. So they own their facility, they own their printing, they own that, and IU ought to set it up too and give the finger to the administration.
Well, that's, again, the administration. I'm having trouble sorting out this story because there are First Amendment issues and then business issues. And the school, the university is saying, well, you know, this is we can't subsidize, it's losing money. You can publish what you want. We're not muzzling you. They were losing probably when I was there, but
probably because.
But they're saying we're not muzzling. It's just the business's decision about the way it's distributed. Of course, then you have the firing, which I guess sort of is a wrinkle in there. Is that business? This is good business. A valid defense here?
I think it's a trend of
censorship.
Some of IU's decisions that they've made. I mean, even going back to the whole free speech and the whole Dunn Meadow incident, you know, if you do have students making encampments, which is what they call the disrupting students, you should absolutely do something to address that. But it's the idea of releasing it the night before, hours before a protest was supposed to start, and then you use some aggressive tactics. It's you understand what they're doing, but it's how they implement it is the issue. And I think the same thing can be applied here. You know, you do have a $300,000 annual deficit from some of these, so you just want to move it to strictly online. And I don't think they're necessarily censoring that, to Niki's point, yet. But, I mean, you go on the Daily Student website right now, and it is just IU just getting destroyed right now.
Like I say, PR
that
101,
censorship, then
case study and how to not do things.
But again, I just want to add one thing.
Yeah.
And obviously, the business decision of whether something's losing money is a fair discussion to have, okay? But this is not a business. This is a chance for students to learn. Right. And we have sports that lose money every year, and they're subsidized by football and basketball. Are we cutting all those sports too? I mean, not everything is going to make money. The purpose of it is for students to get a well-rounded education.
And I'm reminded of something back in 2012 when there was a consolidation of the journalism school with other programs. Then President Michael McRobbie said, and I wrote this out, there's no point in saving a school that trains people to manage fleets of horses if the motor car has taken over horse-drawn transportation. I said then, and I think now, that so misses the point about journalism. It's about information gathering. It's about the ethics of the profession. It's about history and context. It's about building a narrative. It's about using data. Are they missing the mark completely?
I think the mark has been missed, absolutely. And when you look at, you know, just this trend happening at universities
voice would never fly, though, in a newsroom like that.
Indiana, I mean, the Exponent, the Purdue Exponent, was the only place for journalists to write. I mean, they don't have a program at Purdue, so we're really shutting out some serious voices that should be included.
One of the good news things that they did report on, and also getting attention, Curt Cignetti. I can't go a week without talking about IU football. I got to have a palate cleanser. You know, everybody was worried he was going to be poached by Penn State. He's a Pennsylvania native.
$3 million is a big draw.
Well, but now it just so happened that this was announced this week.
I'd like to know if with $93 million, the IU football team is going to be making, like, are they going to have a deficit? I'd like to see.
They probably will make that if they keep on this path. But yeah, 8-year extension, $11.5 million. Good for IU.
Of course, yeah. I mean, love it. Everyone's enjoying it.
That is the correct answer. I'm like John McLaughlin here. That is correct.
Check.
I mean, is that there are cynics who say that IU had a lot of bad publicity this week, and that this somehow was timed I mean, that would be quite a conspiracy that James Franklin lost to. I mean, that's a big conference table.
Give the administration more credit than they're due. I think the speculation about Penn State looking for a head coach is what triggered that story about Cignetti, and they have nothing to do with each other. I'm glad he's staying, but I am appalled at the president and the trustees' action regarding the Indiana Daily Student.
I got to let an Indiana State guy weigh in on this, too. This would never happen in Terre Haute, would it?
I didn't go to Indiana State. I went to IUPUI.
Oh, this would never happen in Indianapolis, would it?
Yeah.
All right. I'm sorry I misplaced you then.
It's all good.
Well, I had to end with that very positive note that we hope the winning streak continues. Yeah. That's it for Indiana Week in Review. Our panel has been Democrat Ann DeLaney, Republican Chris Mitchem, Jill Sheridan, managing editor at WFYI, and Niki Kelly, editor-in-chief of the Indiana Capital Chronicle. I'm Jon Schwantes, host of Indiana Lawmakers. Join us again next time, because a lot can happen in an Indiana week. The views expressed are solely those of the panelists.
Indiana Week in Review is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations. Additional support is provided by the Indy Chamber.